Today we find out the results that have come from months of my time. This time was not wasted. This was a worthwhile journey. I bought 5 bows at the beginning of 2020 in order to deepen my knowledge of each one and select one winner. Even as the archer loves the arrow that flies, so too he loves the bow that remains constant in his hands. A Nigerian proverb. This is what I've found. This is part 2. Today's the day. No more waiting. End of the video. You're gonna find out what bow I picked for 2020. If you don't want to watch the entire review, you can just skip to right here and kind of bypass all the extra parts of the review. I didn't put a bunch of time into it or anything. You want the reward without the effort? No problem. I'll give it to you. Go ahead, do it. So one of the standard specs that's kind of thrown around is axle to axle. And what that measurement is when the bow is at rest, we measure from one axle of the bow down to the other axle. I've said in the past I don't want to shoot anything shorter than a 32-inch axle to axle. And then Matthews decides to come out with a 31.5. Really? Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. An angle that I'm curious about isn't the axle to axle, but it's actually the string angle. I want to know how shallow or how steep that V is when I pull back. Something that's a really steep V is going to force me, if I'm anchoring here, to tuck my head down to get my nose to touch the string, or to pull it way back here in order to get that string to my nose where I want to actually properly anchor it. So I found that a more comfortable string angle is an angle that is not quite as steep, which is why I tend to go with bows that are probably considered on the longer side for a hunting bow. Here's the axle to axle measurement of all the bows we shot this year. Here is the string angle of all the bows that I shot this year. And I measured the string angle when I took the bow to full draw on the draw board. I measured from where the string came off the cam from top to bottom. The RX4 was the longest at 35 inches. But the one that I found the most interesting was the VXR. That riser on the VXR is so long and those limbs come past parallel when you're at full draw, unlike something like the Bowtech where it's got a shorter riser but the limbs come up at a more like kind of traditional, what we would think a bow looks like, angle. Because the cams on the VXR are so large, the actual V, the string angle that we're talking about, is really comparable to the rest of the bows. Let's talk about the arrow that I used for the test. For the test, I used Victory VAP .166 Elite 300 spine arrows cut to 30 inches. There's a 45 grain outsert and then a 125 grain tip, and I left the factory blazers that it came fletched with. I'm sure this is pretty much what everybody's been waiting for. How accurate is the bow? Like, we can get rid of all this other crap. I want to know how well it shoots. So here are the results of how I shot. So I shot from 50, 60, 70, 80, and 100 yards. By shooting at those longer distances, I'm able to see little variations in the bow that I may or may not be able to see at shorter distances. Some of the issues with tunability, with hold, are greatly exaggerated as you move back. And because I'm obviously not a professional archer, this also gives me an opportunity to see which bow is more forgiving, which one, when I do make a bad shot, is actually saving me a little bit. Or on the opposite side of that, which bow is actually exaggerating that and making that worse for me. So in order to measure the impact of the arrows and the size of my groups, I would take a piece of paracord and I would wrap it around the base of the arrows, like so. This is a 21-inch group. Each side measures 7 inches. 7 plus 7 plus 7 is 21. This is another way to get a 21. The total distance between the top arrow and the bottom arrow measures 10.5. 10.5 plus 10.5 is 21. This is the most disappointing way to get a 21. Stacking 2 arrows together and then one errant arrow 10.5 inches away. There's a chance I was a little bit inebriated while I was doing the last voiceover, so listening to it back now while I'm editing it's a great memory. I was really hoping the variation was going to be a lot more. Like, I was hoping one was just going to be like, oh my gosh, that's the most accurate bow ever. But the reality is, I made sure they were in tune. I made sure they were all shooting bullets. I took my time, and here's what I think the variation came down to. One factor. And that was how it felt when I was at full draw. The stability of the hold of the bow. The two that stood out above and beyond were the Prime and the Matthews. Now, I tried different stabilizer weights. I tried different stabilizer lengths. Add more front weight, add more back weight, pull the back bar out, pull it up, pull it left, pull it right, do everything. And I did that for every single bow. And I did that before I was comfortable to actually get shooting and keeping score. So now that I've kind of mentioned it, let's talk about hold. The two bows that I think stood out above and beyond the rest of them. The Prime and the Matthews. Because the majority of the weight of the Prime is below the shelf as opposed to above the shelf, they're trying to get that weight down low. The dual track has to have some effect when you're actually at draw. And then obviously when you let that release go and that string starts moving forward, I think that's where the Prime really excels above some of these other bows as far as taking out some of my mistakes. If I've got too much face pressure, if I've got my hand turned a weird way, I think that the Prime is going to create a little bit more forgiveness than any of the other bows, again, because it's pulling from that dual track. I'm not an engineer. This is speculation. Just remember this. But I'll say this. As well as the Prime held, the Matthews holds better for me. There were days that I was shooting the VXR where I felt like my pin float was almost zero. I'd be at 60 yards, just holding, looking at that pin and just feeling like it was just sitting perfectly exactly where I want it to. And then I would start to pull through the shot and just bam, that arrow would go off and I knew exactly where it was going the entire time. If I was going to rank them as far as hold for me, I would probably say that the RX4 had the most amount of jitters and I had to add the most amount of weight to actually get the RX4 to feel comfortable for me. Probably the Bowtech and the Elite were tied. And again, you guys saw the shooting results. It's not like I'm just crazy all over the place. Then I'm going to go with the Prime. Then I'm going to go with the Matthews. You ever been in a restaurant, kind of like a fancy restaurant, and you've seen one of those guys take the wine and then they smell it? Yes, rubber hose, brown cow manure. No, white cow manure. That's this part. What we're about to talk about is very subjective because what I'm going to talk about is the smoothness of the draw. Now, I've tried to do some math and I've tried to do some weighing, and I'll explain to you what I did and talk you through kind of the method to the madness that I was trying to put in place. But I'm just going to draw the bows, tell you what I'm thinking when I'm drawing them, letting you know what I think they feel like. The Bowtech starts off smooth, and then at the end there's a little bit of a, what are we doing? That's not, nope. Oh, yep, nope. I've never been a good drawer. Let's try that again. The draw starts off smooth, but a few inches from the back wall, the pressure starts to build up and stack, and then, boom, it just drops you into the back wall. If you set the cam to performance mode, it's worse. There's a hill on the back end of the draw cycle for the Elite. The drop into the back wall isn't abrupt like the Bowtech, but it is noticeable. The valley shortens up significantly when the let-off is changed from 90% down to 80%. The RX4 has a larger hump than the Elite that happens sooner. It's a smooth trip to the top and a smooth trip back down. The drop into the back wall is less noticeable than the Bowtech or the Elite. The trajectory of the Prime seems somehow flatter. I didn't notice any large humps anywhere, and the drop into the back wall is short, but it is noticeable because the back wall for the Prime is rock hard. That's probably too much. Yeah, I don't think it's quite that deep. It's probably more like this. The Matthews draw has no noticeable humps, but there's this increased resistance halfway through the cycle. I can only describe it as noise. As soon as you start to wonder if the noise is going to get worse, you're in the back wall and you literally barely notice the change. So I said in the beginning that I did a little bit of math. Like I was trying to use the drawboard and a scale to actually measure and kind of incrementally do it, but I was like, I'm uninterested in this level of detail. There are people that will do it for you, I'm sure, but I hope that you get the gist of what I'm saying. The Matthews and the Prime reached peak weight latest in the cycle, and I wonder if that is why, to me, they are smoother. It wasn't significantly later, it was between 1.5 inches and 2 inches later than the rest of the bows. But when you're contracting your muscles, the later in that process, the more contracted you are. So there may be a perception of that draw cycle feeling easier. So at the tail end of the draw, I talk about that valley and then the back wall. So the back wall is when you're at full draw and you start to pull, how much resistance you're getting from either the cables or the limbs, depending on if it's got cable stops or limb stops. The bows have different amounts of motion that they will let you actually pull through. Ranking the bows from softest back wall to hardest back wall, the RX4 is by far the softest. Probably followed by the Matthews and the Elite if you're not using the limb stops for the Elite. Then I would actually say it's the Bowtech, which I was really surprised. The Bowtech's back wall is super firm. For just being a standard cable stop and not having any weird yokes or anything special for it, man, that thing is a brick in the back wall. And then the Prime. The Prime, it was literally like just pulling into a concrete wall. So I actually like a little bit of movement in the back wall. I don't like drawing into a really hard back wall because the other thing is I get a little lazy when I'm at home, and I know I shouldn't, but I do. And when I draw fast, when I draw quickly, I don't like that slam into the back wall. I like something that's got just a little bit of forgiveness when I hit there so that I'm not just, feeling like I'm tearing my body up, hitting a brick wall that's stopping every single time. So the back wall that I prefer is something that's similar to the Elite or the Matthews. All right, so we have an email going out to all 5 of the manufacturers through whatever their preferred method of contact is on the website. 3 of them have like a contact us page, and then 2 of them had an email, and I'm going to do it all at the same time. It's the same verbiage. Basically, I purchased a blank along with 4 other bows this year to put through their paces and upload a video to YouTube. I'll be blah, 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 blahing with the bows when I get done. I purchased the bow for full price from insert the name of the company. I was hoping because of the circumstance that y'all would allow the warranty to transfer to the end owner. I'm sending the same inquiry to all the manufacturers, Elite, Matthews, Prime, and Bowtech, to check on this, as well as how long it takes to get a response from the support team. So there goes Bowtech. There goes Elite. There goes Prime. There goes Matthews. There goes Hoyt. So I received responses back from each of the companies within 48 hours. Bowtech, Matthews, Prime, and Hoyt were all similar. It was kind of like I'd reached a customer service person that knew that the answer was probably going to be no. Elite was different. Elite moved it up the chain, and I had asked if the warranty could transfer to the end person given the details of what I'm doing with this. And they came back and they said yes. So we're going to talk about what I'm doing with these bows at the end, but I would say that's a big deal for Elite. The rest of the bows come with a lifetime warranty if you're registered as the original user of the bow. Let's talk about speed. So I wanted to test each bow with 3 different arrow weights. I did 350 grain Black Eagle, I did a 450 grain Victory Vap, and then I did a 530 grain Victory Vap. And here are the speeds. You'll notice the RX4 only has 1, and that's because I accidentally tore it down before I actually did the lightweight arrow and the heavyweight arrow. The brace height being shorter, the distance between the grip and the string, it allows that string to continue to come forward like another inch or another half inch. Here are the brace heights for the different bows. The thing is, when you get a shorter brace height, they tend to be less forgiving because the arrow is on the string longer. It's got more time for that string to get all wobbly and crazy. People get really hung up on speed. I guess if you're shooting a shorter draw length or a significantly lighter poundage, then that could matter. But for me, because I'm a long draw length, it's not that big a thing for me. And these are so close together. Yeah, the VXR is faster, and that's because of the brace height. But I know that basically I could get all of these bows shooting a similar speed if I wanted to twist a cable up to make it faster. If I wanted the bow tech to go faster, I could just switch those mods over to performance. Let's talk about sound. How noisy are these bows? I think it's a little deceiving because our faces are so close as they're going off. I downloaded an app, so take that for what it is. It's probably not like perfect, but I set the phone 10 feet away from each bow, and here are the decibel readouts that I got for each bow. They're all really similar. Now, this was with no stabilizers, no sights, no nothing. Like, this is basically just the rest and the bow. If you put a bunch of vibration dampening things on there, you put stabilizers on there, you get a scope on there, the bows are going to quiet down. Remember at the beginning of the video when I did the thing where I told people when they could kind of skip to? Okay, we're about to get to the results, but I need 5 seconds of your time real quick. 5 seconds, I'll be right back. That's what you get for skipping ahead. Hey. Do you guys have a Prime Black 5 in stock by chance? Like ready to go? Awesome. Winner's the VXR. By this much! This much! This is a tool I have complete confidence in. I will take this bow to Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico on elk hunts. It will come to Canada for black bear and Alabama for hogs. It will be in blinds and trees with me in Tennessee during the whitetail rut. It will be with me every day I shoot targets at home and at 3D courses across the country. The 2020 VXR 31.5 by Matthews. This has been a sponsored video. Sponsored by me.